Somebody, please, help me. The cry sliced through the static of Kai's comms, desperate and raw, echoing across the desolate moon of Orvian. Kai's hands froze on the controls of his ship, the stellar wind, as the signal crackled again, faint but unmistakable. His heart kicked against his ribs. He was a pilot of the stars, a man who danced through nebulas bursting in fiery splendor, dodged asteroid fields that shredded steel like paper, and haggled with traitors whose languages hissed like wind through forgotten canyons. But that voice, trembling, pleading, hit him like a shockwave. Nothing in his years roaming the galaxy could have prepared him for what he was about to find. He'd landed on Orvian's cracked, gray surface to investigate the distress signal, expecting a stranded smuggler, a malfunctioning drone, or just a glitch from a dying beacon. Instead, he found her. She was a vision, a breathtaking anomaly against the barren landscape. Her hair spilled over her shoulders like a river of white silk, catching the harsh glare of Orvian's twin suns and shimmering as if woven from starlight. Her ears, pointed, tufted, fox-like, twitched with every faint sound, betraying her alertness even as she strained against crude restraints pinning her to a jagged slab of rock. Her clothing, a patchwork of thick, luxurious fur, hung in tatters, streaked with dirt and blood. She'd been here too long, fighting to survive. Kai's breath caught, his pulse quickening. She didn't belong here, not on this forsaken rock where the air tasted of metal and the silence crushed your skull. His hand brushed the blaster at his hip, a reflex honed by years of caution, but something in her presence stopped him cold. She wasn't a threat. She was a mystery. He stepped closer, boots crunching on the gravelly ground, and her head snapped up, her eyes wide, luminous, the deep blue-green of an ocean he'd never seen, locked onto his. Time slowed, the universe collapsing into the space between them. Fear flickered in her gaze, raw and unguarded, but beneath it burned a spark of hope, a silent plea that sank into his chest and held tight. "Are you the one who called for help?" Kai asked, his voice low and steady, like calming a startled creature. He raised a hand, palm out, signaling he meant no harm. Her head tilted, those fox-like ears perking up. But no words came at first. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes screamed desperation, a need so primal it transcended language. Kai scanned the horizon, ensuring they were alone, then closed the distance. The restraints were rough, forged from some alien metal he didn't recognize, but his multi-tool hummed to life and sliced through them like butter. As the last bond snapped, she collapsed forward, and he caught her, her slight frame trembling against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soft, melodic thread, laced with an accent that curled around the words like smoke. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a jolt through him. "You speak my language?" Kai asked, steadying her as he searched her face. "A little," she murmured, her ocean eyes meeting his again. "I am Zara, from the planet Lunara." "Kai," he replied, helping her stand. Her legs wobbled, but she gripped his arm, her touch warm and firm despite her fragility. "We need to move. Whoever left you here might come back." She nodded, her white hair brushing his shoulder as she leaned into him. "Yes, we must hurry." They crossed the moon's surface together, her hands slipping into his as naturally as if they'd done it 1,000 times. Her fingers were soft, her grip surprisingly strong, sending a strange warmth curling up his arm. The silence around them was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps and the distant whine of wind through the rocks. Kai's ship, the Stellar Wind, loomed ahead, a sleek, silver haven against Orvian's bleakness. As they boarded, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this chance encounter, was the start of something vast, something that would rewrite his life. Inside, he guided Zara to the co-pilot's seat, her fur-clad form sinking into the cushioned leather. The engines roared, and the stellar wind lifted off, Orvian's gray expanse shrinking beneath them. Kai punched in coordinates for a neutral space station, a safe harbor to catch their breath and plan their next move. Zara stared out the viewport, her gaze fixed on the stars, her expression a fragile mix of relief and lingering dread. Who were they? Kai asked, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship. The ones who left you there? She turned to him, her eyes sharp and intense, as if weighing how much to reveal. They are the hunters of Orvian's wastelands, she said, her accent thickening with emotion. Ruthless beings who capture and trade creatures like me, for sport, for slavery, for whatever twisted purpose they desire. Kai's jaw clenched, anger flaring in his chest. You're safe now, he said, his tone firm, almost a vow. I won't let them take you again. Her hand reached out, hesitant at first, then bold, her fingers brushing his. The touch was electric, a shiver racing up his spine as her skin met his. I believe you, Kai, she said softly, her voice wrapping around his name like a caress. But there is more you must know. Before she could elaborate, the ship jolted, a shrill alarm piercing the air. Red lights pulsed across the control panel, and Kai's hands flew to the controls, his pulse spiking. Proximity alert, he muttered, scanning the readings. We're being followed. Zara's eyes widened, her body tensing in the seat. They have found us. Kai shot her a glance, his face hardening with resolve. Hold on tight, he said, gripping the controls. This is going to be a rough ride. The stellar winds surged forward, engines screaming as they tore through the void. Outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light, and behind them, the dark shapes of pursuers loomed closer. Kai's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening his focus. But beneath it all, Zara's presence lingered, a quiet promise, a connection he couldn't yet name, pulling him into a story that was only just beginning. The stellar wind screamed through the void, its engines a defiant roar against the silence of space. Kai's hands gripped the controls, knuckles white, as he weaved through a jagged asteroid belt, the ship shuddering with every near miss. Behind them, the hunters' ships, sleek, predatory vessels with hulls like blackened bone, closed in, their weapons glinting under the starlight. The proximity alarm wailed, a relentless pulse that matched the hammering of Kai's heart. Zara clung to the co-pilot's seat, her white hair swaying with the ship's violent maneuvers, her fox-like ears flattened against her head. Her ocean blue eyes darted between the viewport and Kai, wide with a mix of fear and trust. The air between them crackled, not just with the urgency of their escape, but with something unspoken, a growing thread of connection that seemed to tighten with every second they spent evading death. Kai, they're gaining, Zara said, her voice trembling but laced with a steely resolve. Her accent curled around his name, sending a shiver down his spine despite the chaos. I see them, Kai growled, his focus razor-sharp. He yanked the controls, sending the stellar wind into a spiraling dive past a massive asteroid. The ship groaned, but held together, its hull scraping sparks against a boulder the size of a small moon. A glance at the rear scanners showed one of the hunter's ships wasn't as lucky. Its wing clipped the rock, erupting in a silent burst of flame that lit up the void. One down, Kai muttered, a grim smile tugging at his lips. But two more remained, their weapons locking on with a cold, mechanical precision. A laser grazed the stellar wind's shields, rocking the cabin. Zara gasped, her hand instinctively reaching for Kai's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. The touch was electric, grounding him even as the ship spun wildly. Hold on, he said, meeting her gaze for a fleeting moment. Her eyes held his, and in that instant, the galaxy faded. The hunters, the asteroids, the danger. There was only her breath quick and shallow, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. The moment shattered as another laser blast streaked past. Too close. Kai snapped back to the controls, diving toward a dense cluster of asteroids. We need cover, he said, voice taut. If we can lose them in the debris field, we might have a chance. Zara nodded, her grip on his arm loosening but not letting go. Do what you must, she said softly. I trust you. Those words hit harder than any laser. Kai pushed the ship harder, threading through the asteroid maze with a pilot's instinct honed by years of reckless gambles. The hunters followed, relentless, their ships weaving with unnatural grace. But Kai knew the stellar wind like an extension of himself, and he wasn't about to let these bastards take Zara back. As they plunged deeper into the field, the asteroids grew thicker, a chaotic swarm of rock and ice. Kai's hands danced across the controls, his every move precise yet daring. Zara watched him, her fear giving way to something else. Admiration, maybe, or something warmer. Her gaze lingered on the taut lines of his jaw, the way his muscles flexed under his flight jacket as he fought to keep them alive. She shifted in her seat, her fur-clad thigh brushing against his, the contact sending a jolt through them both. Kai felt it, that spark, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not yet. Zara, check the scanner, he said, voice rougher than he intended. Tell me what you see. She leaned forward, her white hair falling over her shoulder as she studied the display. The motion brought her closer, her scent, wild, like a forest after rain, mixed with the faint musk of her furs, filling the small cockpit. Kai's breath hitched, his focus wavering for a split second before he forced it back to the controls. They're still behind us, Zara reported, her voice steady now. But the debris is slowing them. They're struggling to keep up. Good, Kai said, a plan forming. He spotted a narrow gap between two massive asteroids, barely wide enough for the stellar wind. This is going to be tight. Brace yourself. Zara's hand found his again, her fingers intertwining with his in a grip that was both desperate and intimate. I'm with you, she whispered, and the words carried a weight that went beyond their immediate danger. Kai didn't respond. He couldn't, not with the way her touch made his blood hum. He guided the ship toward the gap, the hull scraping against rock with a screech that vibrated through the cabin. The hunters hesitated, their larger ships unable to follow. For a moment, the scanners showed nothing but static, the debris field swallowing their pursuers. They burst through the gap, emerging into a quieter stretch of space, the asteroid belt a chaotic wall behind them. Kai exhaled, easing the controls as the alarms fell silent. The stellar wind drifted, its engines cooling, and the sudden stillness felt almost surreal after the frenzy of their escape. Zara let out a shaky breath, her hand still in his. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. The cockpit seemed smaller now, the air charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the hunters. Kai turned to her, finding her eyes already on him, their blue-green depths pulling him in like a tide. You're incredible, she said, her voice low, almost a purr. Her fox-like ears flicked forward, and a faint flush colored her cheeks, barely visible under the starlight streaming through the viewport. I've never seen anyone fly like that. Kai's throat tightened, her words stirring something deep in his chest. I've had practice, he said, trying for a casual tone but failing as his gaze dropped to her lips, full and soft, parted just enough to make his pulse race. Zara leaned closer, her movement slow, deliberate, as if testing the waters. Her fur-clad shoulder brushed his, and the warmth of her body seeped through his jacket, igniting a fire under his skin. On Lunara, she murmured, her accent thickening, we honor those who risk their lives for others. You've saved me, Kai. I owe you. Everything. The word hung between them, heavy with promise. Kai's hand moved of its own accord, brushing a strand of her white hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing the soft, tufted edge. She shivered at the touch, her eyes fluttering half-closed, and the sight sent a rush of heat through him. He wanted to close the distance, to taste the wildness of her, but a flicker of doubt held him back. She was from another world, another life. What did this mean to her? What did it mean to him? Before he could find the words, a faint beep from the console broke the spell. Kai cursed under his breath, turning to the scanner. A single blip pulsed at the edge of the screen, faint but unmistakable. The hunters hadn't given up. They'd found a way through. "They're back," Kai said, his voice tight with frustration. He wanted to stay in this moment, to explore the pull between them, but survival came first. "We're not out of this yet." Zara's hand tightened on his, her expression shifting from soft to fierce. "Then we face them together," she said, her voice carrying a strength that made his heart skip. "Whatever comes, Kai, I'm not leaving your side." He nodded, a fire kindling in his chest, not just for the fight ahead, but for her. The stellar wind hummed back to life, ready to run or fight, and as Kai set a new course, Zara's presence beside him felt like a star burning bright, guiding him through the dark. The stellar wind tore through the blackness of space, its engines a defiant scream against the encroaching hunters. Kai's hands were steady on the controls, but his pulse thundered in his ears, a rhythm matched by the single blip pulsing on the scanner. The hunters were back, relentless, their bone-black ship slicing through the void like a predator stalking its prey. Beside him, Zara sat rigid, her white hair glowing faintly under the cockpit's dim lights, her fox-like ears twitching with every beep of the scanner. Her hand, still entwined with his from their fleeting moment of connection, tightened, her warmth a lifeline in the chaos. "They're closing in," Zara said, her voice low but edged with fire. Her blue-green eyes flicked to the viewport, where the stars stretched into infinite streaks. "We can't outrun them forever." Kai's jaw tightened, his mind racing for options. The stellar wind was fast, but the hunter's ship was built for pursuit, its sleek design cutting through space with ruthless efficiency. He glanced at Zara, her fierce determination mirroring his own, and something in her gaze, unyielding, almost defiant, stoked a fire in his chest. "Then we don't run," he said, his voice steady despite the odds. "We fight." Zara's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise giving way to a nod. "Together," she said, her accent curling around the word like a vow. The weight of it hung in the air, binding them closer as the hunter's ship loomed larger on the scanner. Kai flipped a switch, diverting power to the stellar wind's weapon systems. The console hummed, a low growl that vibrated through the cabin. "Zara, take the auxiliary controls," he said, gesturing to the panel beside her. "You ever fired a plasma cannon?" She shook her head, her ears flicking nervously, but her expression hardened with resolve. "Show me," she said, leaning forward, her fur-clad shoulder brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through him, a spark of heat that lingered even as he focused on the fight ahead. "It's simple," Kai said, guiding her hands to the controls. His fingers grazed hers, the touch lingering just a moment too long, and he caught the way her breath hitched. "Line up the crosshairs, pull the trigger. Don't think, just feel it." She nodded, her eyes locked on the targeting screen, her lips pressed into a determined line. Kai couldn't help but notice the way her white hair framed her face, the way her chest rose and fell with quick, focused breaths. She was a warrior in her own right, and the sight of her, ready to fight by his side, ignited something primal in him. The hunter's ship broke through the last of the asteroid field's debris, its weapons glowing red-hot. Kai didn't wait for them to fire first. "Now!" he barked, banking the stellar wind into a sharp turn. Zara's fingers tightened on the trigger, and a blast of plasma erupted from the ship's cannons, a searing arc of light that slammed into the hunter's shields. The enemy ship veered, its hull sparking, but it returned fire, a laser barrage that grazed the stellar wind's flank, rocking the cabin violently. Zara gasped, her body swaying into Kai's, her shoulder pressing against his chest. He steadied her with one hand, his other locked on the controls. "Keep firing," he urged, his voice a mix of command and encouragement. She obeyed, her shots growing bolder, more precise, as if she'd been born for this. The hunters fired again, their lasers carving glowing trails through the void. But Kai's piloting was a dance of instinct and skill, weaving the stellar wind through the onslaught. The battle became a blur of motion and light, the cockpit filled with the roar of engines, the screech of alarms, and the pulse of plasma fire. Kai and Zara moved as one, their actions synchronized in a way that felt almost otherworldly. Her shots weakened the hunter's shields, and Kai seized the opening, diving toward the enemy ship in a reckless maneuver. "Hold tight," he shouted, pulling the stellar wind into a corkscrew spin that brought them nose to nose with the hunters. Zara fired again, a direct hit that shattered the enemy's shields. The hunter's ship faltered, its hull scorched, but before Kai could land the killing blow, a new alarm blared, a distress signal, not from them, but from the hunter's ship. Kai's hands froze on the controls, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell?" Zara leaned forward, her breath catching as she scanned the incoming transmission. "It's not a trick," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "They're surrendering." Kai's brow furrowed, suspicion warring with curiosity. He opened the comms channel, and a guttural voice crackled through, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Zara stiffened, her ears flattening as she translated. "They say they're not here for me," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "They're after something else, something I carry." Kai's head snapped toward her, his heart pounding. "What do you mean, something you carry?" Zara's gaze dropped, her fingers trembling as she reached into the folds of her tattered fur clothing. She pulled out a small, glowing orb, no larger than a fist, pulsing with an eerie, violet light. It hummed faintly, its energy vibrating through the air, and Kai felt a chill crawl up his spine. "This," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a relic from Lunara, a key to something ancient, something they'll kill to possess." Kai stared at the orb, its light casting strange shadows across Zara's face, highlighting the curve of her cheekbones, the intensity in her eyes. The sight of her holding this dangerous, mysterious object stirred a mix of awe and protectiveness in him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with concern. "I didn't know who to trust," she admitted, her eyes meeting his, vulnerable yet fierce. "On Lunara, this relic is sacred, tied to our people's survival. I was sent to protect it, but I failed, until you found me." The words hung heavy, their weight settling into the space between them. Kai's hand moved instinctively, covering hers where she held the orb, his touch firm but gentle. Her skin was warm, her pulse racing under his fingers, and the contact sent a rush of heat through him, mingling with the adrenaline of their escape. "You didn't fail," he said, his voice low, intense. "You're still here, and so is that thing. We'll figure this out, together." Zara's lips parted, her breath catching as she leaned closer, the orb's glow illuminating the space between them. For a moment, the universe shrank to just them, their shared breath, the heat of their closeness, the unspoken promise in her eyes. But the comms crackled again, the hunter's voice cutting through, urgent and demanding. Zara's expression hardened, and she pulled back, clutching the orb tightly. "They're offering a deal," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Safe passage if we hand over the relic." Kai's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the controls. "And you trust them?" "No," she said, her voice sharp, her ears flicking with defiance. "But they're desperate. That gives us an edge." Kai glanced at the scanner, the hunter's ship still hovering, its weapons powered down but ready. The orb pulsed in Zara's hands, a beacon of mystery and danger, and Kai knew this was no longer just about escape. They were caught in something bigger, something that could change the galaxy, and their bond was the only thing keeping them anchored. "Buckle up," he said, his voice a low growl as he powered up the stellar wind's engines. "We're not giving them anything. Let's finish this." Zara nodded, her eyes blazing with a mix of fear and determination. And as the ship surged forward, the relic's light cast a violet glow across the cockpit, a silent promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. The stellar winds surged forward, its engines a defiant roar as Kai pushed the ship to its limits. The violet glow of Zara's relic casting eerie shadows across the cockpit. The hunter's ship loomed behind them, its weapons powered down but its presence a constant threat, like a predator waiting for a single misstep. Kai's jaw was set, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind churned with the weight of Zara's revelation. That orb, small enough to fit in her palm, yet powerful enough to make ruthless hunters beg, was no mere trinket. It was a key to something ancient, something worth killing for, and now it was their burden to protect. Zara sat beside him, clutching the relic tightly, her white hair shimmering under the cockpit's lights, her fox-like ears flicking with every hum of the ship. Her blue-green eyes darted between the scanner and Kai, a mix of resolve and unease in her gaze. The air between them was thick, charged with the aftermath of their battle and the unspoken tension that had been building since their hands first touched. But the hunter's offer, safe passage for the relic, hung like a shadow, forcing them to confront a choice neither was ready to make. "We can't keep running blind," Kai said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engines. "If that thing's as important as you say, we need a plan, fast." Zara nodded, her fingers tightening around the orb. "On Lunara, this relic is tied to our survival," she said, her accent softening with a hint of sorrow. "It's more than a key, it's a promise, a bond to our ancestors. I was meant to guard it, not drag you into this." Kai shot her a glance, his expression softening despite the adrenaline still pumping through him. "You didn't drag me anywhere," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I'm the one who cut you free, remember? Besides, I'm not exactly new to trouble." Her lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through her worry, and for a moment, the weight of their situation lightened. But the scanner beeped, a sharp reminder of the hunters trailing them, and Kai's smile faded. He scanned the star charts, searching for an escape. "There's a nebula cluster nearby," he said, pointing to a swirling mass of gas and light on the display. "It's dense, unpredictable. If we can lose them in there, we might buy time to figure out our next move." Zara leaned closer to study the chart, her shoulder brushing his, the contact sending a spark through him. "A nebula?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Is it safe?" "Safe's not the word I'd use," Kai admitted, his tone dry. "But it's better than letting those hunters catch us." "You in?" Her eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, and the way she said it, like a partner, not just a passenger, made his chest tighten. Kai punched in the coordinates, and the stellar wind veered toward the nebula, its vibrant clouds of purple and blue swallowing the stars. As they entered, the ship shuddered, buffeted by electromagnetic currents that made the controls twitch under Kai's hands. The hunters followed, their ship a dark silhouette against the nebula's glow. But the dense gas scrambled their sensors, giving Kai the edge he needed. The cockpit grew dim, the nebula's light filtering through in soft, shifting hues that danced across Zara's face. The tension of the chase eased slightly, replaced by a strange intimacy as the ship drifted through the swirling clouds. Kai glanced at Zara, catching the way she stared at the nebula, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice soft, almost reverent. "On Lunara, we have nothing like this." "Yeah, it's something," Kai said, his gaze lingering on her instead of the view. The way her white hair caught the nebula's light, the curve of her lips as she spoke, it was hard to look away. He cleared his throat, forcing his focus back to the controls. "Let's just hope it hides us long enough." But the nebula wasn't just a hiding place. It was a maze of currents and debris, and Kai's luck had a way of running thin. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, a loud clang echoing through the hull. Zara gasped, gripping the armrests, her ears flattening. "What was that?" she asked, her voice sharp. Kai cursed under his breath, checking the diagnostics. We hit something. Debris. Maybe. Systems are still green, but we need to check the hull. If there's a breach, we're in trouble. He unstrapped himself, motioning for Zara to follow. Come on. There's an access panel in the cargo bay. We'll need to suit up. Zara hesitated, clutching the relic, then nodded, her expression determined. They hurried to the cargo bay, the ship's corridors narrow and dimly lit, the nebula's glow casting strange shadows through the viewports. Kai grabbed 2 enviro suits from a locker, handing one to Zara. Ever worn one of these? He asked, holding up the sleek, form-fitting gear. She shook her head, her ears twitching nervously. On Lunara, we don't travel like this, she said, eyeing the suit with suspicion. Kai grinned, hoping to ease her tension. It's easy. Just step in. Let it seal. Think of it like a really tight hug. Her brows furrowed, a mix of confusion and amusement crossing her face. A hug? She echoed, her accent making the word sound oddly exotic. Your people are strange. Says the girl with fox ears, Kai teased, immediately regretting it as her cheeks flushed a soft pink. Sorry, I didn't mean. It's fine, she said quickly, a shy smile tugging at her lips. I like your humor. The moment hung between them, awkward yet warm, and Kai busied himself with his suit to hide the heat creeping up his neck. But the cargo bay was cramped, and as they struggled into the suits, their movements became a clumsy dance of bumped elbows and brushed shoulders. Zara fumbled with the suit's clasp, her fingers slipping, and Kai stepped closer to help, his hands grazing her waist as he adjusted the seals. Hold still, he murmured, his voice lower than intended. Her breath hitched, her body tensing under his touch, and when she looked up, her eyes were impossibly close, her lips parted. The air grew heavy, the relic's faint hum the only sound besides their breathing. Kai's hands lingered, the suit forgotten, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might lean in. A loud hiss from the hull snapped them apart, the ship shuddering again. Kai cursed, grabbing a toolkit. We're not done here, he said, meaning the hull but feeling the words carry a different weight. Zara nodded, her flush deepening, and they moved to the access panel, the awkwardness lingering like a charged current. Outside, tethered to the ship, they found a gash in the hull, small but dangerous, leaking air in faint, silvery wisps. Kai worked fast, patching it with sealant, while Zara held the tools, her movements precise despite her inexperience. But as they finished, a shadow moved in the nebula's glow, the hunter's ship, closer than it should be. They found us, Zara whispered, her voice tight, her hand brushing Kai's arm in a reflexive grip. Kai's heart raced, but he flashed a grin, trying to keep things light. Guess they're jealous of our repair skills, he said, earning a surprised laugh from Zara that warmed him more than it should. Back inside, now, they scrambled back into the cargo bay, shedding the suits in a rush, their hands brushing again, the contact sending sparks through Kai's nerves. As they raced to the cockpit, the scanner showed the hunters closing in, their weapons powering up, but Zara clutched the relic, her eyes fierce, and Kai knew they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other, and the secrets that bound them. Let's give them a show, Kai said, his voice a mix of defiance and thrill, as he powered up the stellar wind for another desperate run. The stellar wind roared back to life, its engines a pulsing heartbeat as Kai gunned it toward the heart of the nebula. The hunters' ship a relentless shadow on their tail. The cockpit glowed with the soft, swirling hues of the nebula's clouds, casting an ethereal light over Zara's white hair and fox-like ears, making her look like a creature born from the stars themselves. Her hands still clutched the relic, its violet glow pulsing faintly, but her eyes were on Kai, fierce and unwavering, as if the danger closing in only sharpened her trust in him. Kai's hands danced across the controls, weaving the ship through the nebula's currents with a precision that belied the chaos around them. The hunter's ship fired a warning shot, a laser streaking past close enough to make the stellar wind shudder. Zara's breath caught, her body swaying toward Kai's in the cramped cockpit, her thigh pressing against his. The contact was a spark in the dark, igniting a heat that had been simmering since their hands first touched on Orvian. "We need to shake them," Kai said, his voice rough, though whether from the chase or her nearness, he couldn't tell. "There's a pocket of ionized gas ahead. Could scramble their sensors if we time it right." Zara nodded, her blue-green eyes locked on his, a silent agreement that carried more weight than words. "Do it," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper, her accent wrapping around the words in a way that made his pulse race. He banked the ship sharply, diving into the glowing pocket of gas. The stellar wind groaned, its shields sparking as the ionized currents crackled around them. The scanner flickered, the hunter's blip vanishing in a haze of static, and for a moment, the universe was quiet. Just the hum of the ship, the soft pulse of the relic, and the sound of their breathing, quick and synchronized. Kai eased the controls, letting the ship drift in the nebula's embrace, the hunters momentarily lost. He turned to Zara, intending to check the scanner, but found her already looking at him, her eyes luminous in the dim light. The air between them thickened, charged with a tension that had been building through every shared glance, every fleeting touch. Her lips parted, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that matched his own, and the relic's glow seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. "You're good at this," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with something deeper, something that sent a shiver down Kai's spine. "Saving people. Saving me." Kai swallowed, his throat dry. "Just doing what feels right," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips, full and inviting, before flicking back to her eyes. "You make it easy to want to." Her ears twitched, a faint flush spreading across her cheeks, and she leaned closer, her fur-clad shoulder brushing his. The cockpit felt impossibly small, the space between them shrinking until he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "On Lunara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we honor those who protect us with closeness, a bond that goes beyond words." Kai's breath hitched, her words stirring a fire in his chest. "Closeness?" he echoed, his voice low, teasing, but edged with a hunger he couldn't hide. "What's that look like on your world?" Her lips curved into a shy, almost mischievous smile, and she reached out, her fingers trailing lightly along his arm, the touch feather-soft yet searing. "It's feeling," she said, her accent thickening as she searched for the right words. "Touch, trust, giving yourself to the moment." The air grew heavy, the nebula's glow wrapping them in a cocoon of light and shadow. Kai's hand moved instinctively, covering hers where it rested on his arm, his thumb brushing the soft skin of her wrist. Her pulse raced under his touch, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her face inches from his, her breath warm against his cheek. The relic slipped from her grasp, rolling gently onto the console, its light casting a violet sheen across her features, highlighting the curve of her jaw, the delicate line of her neck. "Zara," Kai murmured, his voice rough with want. "We're in the middle of a chase. This isn't the time." But his body betrayed him, leaning closer, drawn to her like a star to a black hole. Her eyes fluttered half-closed, her lips so close he could almost taste them. "Maybe it's the only time," she whispered, her voice a sultry melody. "In danger, we find what matters." Her words undid him. His hand slid to her waist, fingers grazing the edge of her tattered fur clothing, the fabric soft and warm from her body. She shivered at the touch, a soft sound escaping her lips, half gasp, half sigh, that sent a rush of heat through him. He pulled her closer, their bodies pressed together in the cramped cockpit, her curves fitting against him like they were made for it. Her hands found his shoulders, fingers digging in, and the world narrowed to the heat of her skin, the scent of her, like wild forests and starlit nights, filling his senses. Their lips were a breath apart, the tension a living thing. When a sudden jolt rocked the ship, the scanner blared, shattering the moment, and Kai cursed under his breath, pulling back to check the display. The hunters had found them, their ship emerging from the nebula's haze, weapons glowing. Zara's hand lingered on his shoulder, her touch a promise of unfinished business, but her eyes were sharp now, focused on the threat. "They're persistent," she said, her voice steady despite the flush still coloring her cheeks. She retrieved the relic, clutching it tightly, her ears flicking with determination. Kai grinned, the adrenaline of the chase mixing with the fire still burning in his veins. "Guess they're not fans of our bonding moment," he said, his tone light but his eyes dark with intent. Zara's laugh was soft, a sound that warmed him even as he powered up the stellar wind's engines. "Hold that thought," he said, his voice a low growl as he banked the ship into another dive. "We're not done here." Zara's smile was fierce, her hand brushing his one last time before she gripped the auxiliary controls. "No," she said, her eyes locking onto his with a promise that made his heart race. "We're not." The stellar wind plunged deeper into the nebula, the hunters in pursuit, but the heat of that stolen moment lingered, a spark that refused to fade. Kai and Zara were bound now, not just by the relic or the danger, but by something deeper, something that burned brighter with every second they faced the void together. The stellar wind dove deeper into the nebula's swirling depths, its hull humming under the strain of Kai's daring maneuvers. The hunter's ship trailed them, a persistent shadow in the glowing haze, its weapons a constant threat despite the ionized gas scrambling their aim. Kai's hands were steady on the controls, his focus razor-sharp, but the heat of Zara's touch lingered on his skin, her scent, wild and intoxicating, still filling the cockpit. Her presence beside him, fierce and unwavering, was a tether in the chaos, grounding him even as the nebula's currents threatened to tear them apart. Zara gripped the auxiliary controls, her blue-green eyes scanning the console, her white hair catching the nebula's violet glow like a halo. The relic rested on her lap, its pulsing light a silent reminder of the danger they carried. Their almost kiss, the electric pull between them, hung in the air like a promise unfulfilled. But the hunter's relentless pursuit left no room for distraction. Kai banked the ship sharply, dodging a stray chunk of nebula debris, and Zara's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through him despite the stakes. "They're still with us," Zara said, her voice taut but steady, her fox-like ears twitching with every beep of the scanner. "They won't stop, Kai, not until they have the relic, or us." "Then they're going to have to work for it," Kai replied, his tone grim but laced with defiance. He spotted a dense pocket of gas ahead, swirling with electric blue tendrils, and made a snap decision. "Hold on tight. We're going in." The stellar wind plunged into the gas cloud, the cockpit plunging into near darkness as the nebula's glow dimmed. The ship shuddered, its shields sparking against the charged particles, and for a moment, the scanner went blank, the hunters lost in the interference. Kai eased the controls, letting the ship drift, the silence almost deafening after the chaos of the chase. He turned to Zara, intending to check her status, but found her staring at the relic, her expression a mix of determination and something deeper. Fear, maybe, or regret. "Zara," he said softly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "What aren't you telling me? That thing?" He nodded at the relic, its violet pulse casting shadows across her face. "It's more than just a key, isn't it?" Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of vulnerability, a crack in her fierce resolve. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the orb, and then she spoke, her voice low and heavy. "It's not just a key, Kai. It's alive." Kai's breath caught, his mind reeling. "Alive," he echoed, leaning closer, his eyes searching hers. "What do you mean, alive?" Zara's ears flattened, her gaze dropping to the relic as if it held secrets she wasn't ready to share. "On Lunara, We call it the heart of the ancients, she said, her accent thickening with emotion. It's not just an object, it's a vessel, carrying the essence of my people's ancestors, their memories, their strength, their will. It can awaken things, powers, that should stay buried. Kai stared at the orb, its pulsing light suddenly ominous, like a heartbeat from another world. And the hunters know this? He asked, his voice tight. That's why they're so desperate? She nodded, her eyes lifting to meet his, filled with a mix of guilt and resolve. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if you'd understand. On Lunara, this is sacred. To outsiders, it's just a prize or a weapon. Kai's jaw clenched, a surge of protectiveness warring with the shock of her words. He reached out, his hand covering hers where she held the relic, his touch firm but gentle. You should have told me, he said, his voice low, intense. But it doesn't change anything. I'm in this with you, Zara, all the way. Her lips parted, a soft breath escaping, and the tension between them flared again, hotter than before. The cockpit's dim light wrapped them in a cocoon of intimacy, the nebula's glow softening the edges of the world. Zara leaned closer, her hand turning under his, their fingers intertwining. You don't know what you're promising, she whispered, her voice a sultry melody that sent a shiver down his spine. This relic, it binds us, Kai, not just to danger, but to each other. Before he could respond, the ship lurched violently, a deafening explosion rocking the hull. Kai's hands flew to the controls, his heart pounding as red lights flashed across the console. What the hell was that? He barked, scanning the diagnostics. The hunters hadn't fired. The blast came from within the ship. Zara's eyes widened, her gaze snapping to the relic. Its glow pulsed faster, brighter, as if reacting to the chaos. It's awakening, she said, her voice trembling with awe and fear. The heart, it senses the danger. It's trying to protect us. Kai's mind raced, the implications hitting him like a shockwave. Protect us how? He demanded. But before Zara could answer, the cockpit filled with a blinding light, the relic's violet glow erupting into a cascade of energy. Kai shielded his eyes, grabbing Zara's arm to pull her close. Their bodies pressed together as the light enveloped them. A strange hum filled the air, not mechanical but alive, vibrating through their bones, their skin, their very thoughts. When the light faded, Kai blinked, his vision clearing to find Zara staring at him, her eyes wide with shock. But something was different. Her presence felt closer, as if he could sense her heartbeat, her fear, her strength, without a word. What just happened? He asked, his voice hoarse, his hand still gripping her arm. Zara's breath was ragged, her fingers clutching the relic, which now pulsed softly, almost calmly. The heart, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It linked us, our minds, our emotions. It's chosen you, Kai, as its guardian, because of me. Kai's heart stopped, the twist hitting him like a punch. Chosen me, he repeated, his mind reeling. What does that mean? It means you're part of this now, Zara said, her eyes searching his, filled with a mix of wonder and dread. The heart binds its guardians, heart and soul. You feel it, don't you? Me, inside you. Kai swallowed, realizing she was right. He could feel her, a warmth, a presence, like a whisper in his mind, stirring emotions he couldn't name. It was intimate, overwhelming, and terrifyingly real. Their bond, already electric, had become something more, a connection that transcended flesh, forged by an ancient power neither fully understood. Before he could process it, the scanner blared, the hunter's ship emerging from the nebula, closer than ever. Kai's hands snapped to the controls, but the relic's hum pulsed again, and Zara's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. The heart can fight them, she said, her eyes blazing. But we have to trust it, together. Kai met her gaze, feeling her presence in his mind, his heart, and nodded. "Then let's do this," he said, his voice steady despite the shock of their new bond. The stellar wind roared back to life, the relic's light flaring as Kai and Zara faced the hunters, bound by a power that could either save them or consume them both. The stellar wind surged through the nebula's swirling currents, its engines a defiant roar against the hunters' relentless pursuit. The relic's violet glow pulsed in Zara's hands, its hum resonating through the cockpit like a living heartbeat, binding Kai and Zara in ways neither could fully grasp. Kai felt her presence in his mind, a warm, electric thread of her emotions, her fears, her strength, woven into his own thoughts. It was exhilarating and unnerving, a connection that made every glance, every touch, feel like a spark in a powder keg. The hunter's ship loomed closer on the scanner, its weapons charging, but the relic's power offered a chance to fight back, if they could trust it. Kai's hands gripped the controls, his focus split between the chase and the overwhelming sensation of Zara in his head. "You said this thing can fight," he said, his voice taut, glancing at Zara. "How do we make that happen?" Zara's blue-green eyes met his, her fox-like ears twitching with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "The heart responds to us," she said, her accent thickening as she clutched the relic. "Our will, our connection. We have to focus together. Let it guide us." Kai raised an eyebrow, a wry smile tugging at his lips despite the danger. "So, what? We hold hands and think happy thoughts? That's the plan?" Zara's cheeks flushed a soft pink, her ears flattening slightly, and she shot him a look that was half amused, half exasperated. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice carrying a playful edge. "But, yes, touch helps. It strengthens the bond." The word bond hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Kai felt a rush of heat at the thought of touching her again. Their almost kiss in the cockpit, the press of her body against his, flashed through his mind, and hers. He realized, catching a flicker of her own memory through their link. Her eyes widened, and she looked away, her flush deepening, the awkwardness palpable. "Great," Kai muttered, clearing his throat to cover his own embarrassment. "Nothing says fight for your life like holding hands with a psychic alien artifact. No pressure." Zara's laugh was soft, a sound that warmed him even as the scanner beeped urgently. "You're impossible," she said, but her hand reached for his, her fingers intertwining with his in a grip that was both firm and intimate. The contact sent a jolt through him, their bond flaring brighter, and Kai felt her emotions, fear, trust, a spark of something deeper, flood his senses. "Focus," Zara murmured, her voice a sultry melody that made it hard to do just that. She closed her eyes, her white hair glowing under the relic's light, and Kai followed her lead, trying to ignore the way her thumb brushed his palm, sending shivers up his arm. The relic's hum grew louder, vibrating through the cockpit, and Kai felt a strange pull, like a tide drawing him into Zara's mind. Images flickered, ancient temples on Lunara, glowing figures wielding the relic's power, a sense of unity that transcended words. But the moment was shattered by a violent jolt, the stellar wind rocking as a laser grazed its shields. Kai's eyes snapped open, his free hand flying to the controls. "They're not giving us a meditation break," he snapped, banking the ship to dodge another blast. Zara's grip tightened, her nails digging into his hand, and through their bond, he felt her frustration mirror his own. "We're close," she said, her voice urgent. "I can feel it. The heart's ready. Just stay with me." Kai nodded, his jaw clenched, and poured his focus into their link, trusting her even as the hunters fired again. The relic's light flared, a blinding violet wave that pulsed outward, slamming into the hunter's ship. The enemy vessel faltered, its weapons flickering, but it didn't stop. Instead, a new signal crackled through the comms, a guttural voice speaking in Zara's language. Her eyes widened, her ears flattening as she translated. "They're threatening to destroy the nebula itself," she said, her voice trembling. "They have a weapon, a destabilizer. If they use it, everything here, including us, will be torn apart." Kai's heart pounded, the stakes skyrocketing. "Can the relic stop that?" he asked, his voice sharp. Zara hesitated, her eyes searching his, and through their bond, he felt her uncertainty, her fear of pushing the relic too far. "Maybe," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But it could change us. The heart's power isn't just external. It binds its guardians deeper, body and soul." Kai swallowed, the implications hitting hard. "Deeper than this?" he asked, and gesturing to their linked hands, the hum of her emotions in his mind. "What's that even mean?" Zara's flush returned, her ears twitching nervously, and she looked away, clearly flustered. "It's intimate," she mumbled, her accent making the word sound almost forbidden. "On Lunara, guardians who share the heart's power become one in ways I can't explain." Kai's mouth went dry, a mix of intrigue and awkwardness washing over him. "One?" he echoed, his voice cracking slightly, earning a shy glance from Zara. "Like, metaphorically, or—" Her laugh was nervous, a sound that broke the tension, but only heightened the heat between them. "You asked too many questions," she said, but her hand squeezed his, and through their bond, he felt a flicker of her own curiosity, her own pull toward him. Before he could press further, the ship shuddered again, the hunter's destabilizer powering up, its energy signature lighting up the scanner like a supernova. Kai cursed, his humor fading. "All right, intimate alien magic it is," he said, his tone half joking, half desperate. "Let's do this before they blow us to stardust." Zara nodded, her expression fierce, and they closed their eyes, their hands locked together, the relic pulsing between them. The cockpit filled with its violet light, the hum growing into a roar, and Kai felt Zara's presence envelop him, her strength, her warmth, her heart. The power surged, a wave of energy that felt like it could reshape the stars. But it came at a cost. Through their bond, Kai sensed a shift, a deepening of their connection that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The wave hit the hunter's ship, disabling its destabilizer in a shower of sparks. But the backlash rocked the stellar wind, sending Kai and Zara tumbling from their seats. They landed in a tangled heap on the cockpit floor. Zara sprawled across Kai's chest, her white hair fanning over his face, her body pressed against his. The relic rolled nearby, its glow dimming, but their bond burned brighter, her emotions flooding his mind, fear, relief, and something dangerously close to desire. You okay?" Kai asked, his voice hoarse, his hands awkwardly hovering over her waist, unsure where to rest. Zara lifted her head, her face inches from his, her cheeks flushed, her ears twitching. "I think so," she said, her breath warm against his lips. Through their bond, he felt her pulse racing, mirroring his own, and the air grew heavy with unspoken possibilities. A faint beep from the scanner broke the moment, the hunter's ship drifting, disabled but not destroyed. Kai grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "Guess we're not bad at this one thing," he said, earning a shy smile from Zara that made his heart skip. But as they scrambled to their feet, the relic pulsed again, a warning hum that sent a chill through Kai. Zara's eyes met his, filled with a mix of awe and dread. "It's not over," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "The heart, it's awake now, and it wants more." Kai's stomach twisted, the drama of their situation sinking in. But Zara's hand found his again, grounding him. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, bound by a power that was as dangerous as it was irresistible. The stellar wind hung in the nebula's glowing embrace, its engines humming softly as the disabled hunter's ship drifted lifelessly in the distance, its hull scorched and silent. The relic's violet glow pulsed faintly on the cockpit floor, its warning hum still echoing in Kai's ears, a reminder of the power that had both saved them and bound them in ways he was only beginning to understand. Zara's hand was warm in his, their fingers still intertwined from their desperate stand, and through their psychic bond, Kai felt her emotions, relief, fear, and a quiet, unshakable resolve, mingling with his own. The air between them was thick with the weight of what they'd survived and what lay ahead, the relics awakening a promise of challenges yet to come. Kai helped Zara to her feet, his hand steadying her as she brushed her white hair from her face, her fox-like ears twitching with lingering tension. Her blue-green eyes met his, and for a moment, the galaxy faded, the hunters, the nebula, the relic, leaving only the two of them, bound by something deeper than words. "What did you mean? It wants more?" he asked, his voice low, his thumb brushing her wrist, feeling her pulse race under his touch. Zara's gaze dropped to the relic, its light casting soft shadows across her features. "The heart of the ancients," she said, her accent soft but heavy with meaning. "It's alive, Kai. It chose us as its guardians, but it demands balance. Strength for strength, sacrifice for power. It saved us today, but it will ask for more, to protect Lunara, to keep its secrets safe." Kai's chest tightened, the weight of her words settling in. "Sacrifice," he echoed, his eyes searching hers. "What kind of sacrifice?" She stepped closer, her fur-clad body brushing against his, the warmth of her presence grounding him even as her words stirred unease. "On Lunara, guardians give themselves fully, heart, mind, soul. The heart binds us to each other, but also to its purpose. If we fail, it could consume us, or worse, fall into the wrong hands." Kai felt her fear through their bond, a cold thread woven into her warmth, but he also felt her strength, her unwavering commitment. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Then we won't fail," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You and me, Zara, will keep it safe. Together." Her lips parted, a soft breath escaping, and she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest. The gesture was intimate, vulnerable, and Kai's arms wrapped around her instinctively, pulling her close. Her scent, wild, like a forest under starlight, filled his senses, and through their bond, he felt her emotions shift, a tide of gratitude and something deeper, something that made his heart ache. "You don't know what you're promising," she murmured, her voice muffled against his jacket, but there was a smile in her words, a flicker of hope. "You're not even from my world." Kai chuckled softly, the sound breaking the tension. "Yeah, well, my world's pretty boring without you in it," he said, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. Her eyes sparkled, a mix of amusement and warmth, and for a moment, the danger felt far away. But the relic's hum grew louder, a gentle reminder of their reality, and Zara pulled back, her expression sobering. "We need to take the heart to Lunara," she said, her voice firm. "There's a sanctuary there, a place where it can be protected. But the journey, it won't be easy. The hunters won't stop, and the heart's power will draw others." Kai nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we'll face them," he said. "I've got the stellar wind. You've got that crazy glowing orb, and we've got whatever this is." He gestured between them, a playful grin tugging at his lips. But his eyes were serious, filled with a promise he meant with every fiber of his being. Zara's laugh was soft, her ears twitching as she stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest. "This," she said, her voice a sultry melody, "is more than you understand, Kai, but I'll teach you, if you're willing." The words sent a rush of heat through him, their bond amplifying the pull between them. He leaned down, his lips brushing her forehead, a gentle gesture that felt as natural as breathing. "I'm willing," he whispered, feeling her shiver against him, their connection humming with shared emotion. The scanner beeped softly, confirming the hunter's ship was no longer a threat, its systems fried by the relic's power. Kai glanced at the star charts, plotting a course to Lunara, a distant speck in the galaxy's vastness. "Let's get you home," he said, his voice steady but warm. "We'll figure out the rest on the way." Zara nodded, her hands slipping into his as they returned to their seats, the relic resting securely between them. The stellar wind hummed back to life, its engines carrying them out of the nebula's glow and into the endless stars. Through their bond, Kai felt Zara's gratitude, her trust, and a spark of something new, hope for a future they'd forge together. As the ship soared toward Lunara, Kai stole a glance at Zara, her white hair glowing under the cockpit's lights, her eyes fixed on the stars with a quiet strength. The relic's pulse was steady now, a heartbeat that matched their own, and Kai knew this was only the beginning. They were guardians now, bound by an ancient power and a love that defied worlds. Whatever challenges awaited, hunters, secrets, or the heart's demands, they'd face them side by side, their bond a light in the dark, guiding them through the stars. The stellar wind vanished into the cosmos, a silver streak carrying two souls who'd found each other in the void, their story written not just in the relic's glow, but in the unspoken vows they carried in their hearts.